What comes to mind when you hear the word vote? Elections? Partisan politics? Democrat? Republican? Well, let me tell you what I hear. Cutting through the den of the words that now tend to divide and polarize our country, what I hear are we the people. The first words in the preamble to our Constitution, that while at first only applied to a small exclusive group of people, it has now grown to include people of every gender and from all walks of life, even people like me who were formerly convicted of a felony offense. Now, you may think in your mind when you hear the phrase people with a felony conviction, oh, he's talking about felons. But throughout this talk, I would not use that F word because there's a real person behind that word. Someone's mother, father, sister, or brother exists behind that scarlet letter of shame that society tries to force us to live with for the rest of our lives. That F word creates a stigma that may not allow you to see that young man who in August of 2005 was standing in front of railroad tracks waiting on a train to come so he can jump in front of it. To see that at the time he was standing there, that he was homeless, addicted to drugs, recently released from prison, and jobless. You would see that young man eventually cross the tracks, check himself into drug treatment, dedicate his life to community service, go to school, and eventually even get a law degree. And if you decide to stick around long enough, you would also see this man eventually start his own organization that would lead the effort to restore voting rights to over 1.4 million people with a previous felony conviction, and how his efforts led him to being named Floridian of the Year, one of Time Magazine 100 most influential people in the entire world, and a MacArthur Genius Fellow. You would see his organization being nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2023, but you don't get to see all of that if you can't get past that F word. And you wouldn't get to see that that man was me. When I was inspired to launch a citizens initiative to restore the ability to vote to people who were previously convicted of a felony offense, I thought of we the people, and that the people were the most important part of the equation. The preamble did not say we the politicians or we the political parties. What it said was we the people. That's why we engage in the seemingly impossible task of removing politics, racial biases, and stigmas that tend to divide voters and weaken our chances to be successful. I remember when my friend and colleague Neil, he asked me at the beginning of the campaign, who was our enemy? Engaged in politics most of his life, Neil was a veteran of all sorts of campaigns, and he'd grown used to the typical campaigning approach, which dictated that you needed an enemy. I told him that our campaign was different and that we didn't need an enemy. I told Neil that if we can get voters to first see people like me as a human being, we'll win. You see, I had truly believed that if we can get voters to envision someone who they love who has made a mistake, then they would be reminded of their belief in second chances, and they would vote yes for our Citizens Initiative, which was better known as Amendment 4. But we did have a genuine concern about how the general public would view the issue, or better yet, what lens they would look through to decide whether or not to support our efforts. Would their lens be people-centered or politically centered? We knew that if people looked at our issue through a political lens, then their decision would mainly be driven by whether or not it was to their political party's benefit. Now, they would not say that right out, right? But they may even try to conjure up all types of other reasons, all of which would fall flat with minimal scrutiny. But they would try nevertheless. Back then, I remember even talking about the benefits of voting yes on Amendment 4 and how I talked about a Florida study that showed a whopping 22 percentage point reduction in recidivism among a group of over 30,000 people released from incarceration, and how that reduction in that group represented almost $500 million that the state of Florida saved. I even remembered how I used the story of Jesus on the cross as an example of grace, forgiveness, and redemption. Yeah, there were good facts and figures and a great moral reason to support. But at its core was my belief that me, along with every other formerly convicted person, was a part of We the People, simply because we were people first. Because we were able to elevate our campaign above the type of issues that tend to divide our country, the world got to witness an amazing victory in which over 5 million people voted in support of our amendment, with over 1 million of those voters coming from people who experts insisted would be against such an initiative because of political implications. Our initiative even received more votes than either of the gubernatorial candidates that year, and the world got to witness an historic victory on a divisive issue in a divisive state during a divisive time in our country that was not powered by hatred, fear, or politics, but rather they got to witness a victory that was powered by love, forgiveness, and redemption. The world got to witness what can happen when you get voters to look through a lens that's centered on the people and not on the politics. And when voters look through a people-centered lens, they would see someone like me. I remember when I went to vote in the August primary in 2020. It was my first time voting in 35 years. The first time I voted, I had just graduated high school, and plans were already in place for me to join the military a few months later. At the time, it didn't mean much to me. I was 18, getting ready to explore the world and experience adulthood. Now that was exciting and important. Voting wasn't. But in August of 2020, as I walked down the path to enter my polling location, voting had taken on a much different meaning for me. When I was walking down that pathway, I felt as if I was walking on hallowed ground. That's because I started thinking of all the people who lost their lives fighting to create and protect a democracy. I thought of all the blood that was shed throughout this country and abroad. I thought of all the lives that were lost and the sacrifices that was made during the Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and the Civil Rights eras. People that were hung on trees, burned alive, bitten by dogs, and sprayed with fire hoses so that we the people, so that I could have the opportunity to vote. I thought about all the hundreds of volunteers who sacrificed so much of their time and resources to fight so that people like me that had a previous felony conviction could have the opportunity to vote. Volunteers like Miss Laura Pastor, this tiny white lady who even in her 90s would muster up the strength to drive herself across the state of Florida to collect petitions and stand in support of me and every other returning citizen in Florida who wanted to be a part of our democracy. I remember asking her one day, "Miss Laura, how do you get all those businesses to let you collect petitions on their property?" She responded, "Nobody says no to a grandmother." Yes, I knew I was walking on hollow ground for real. When I entered into the polling location, I started to get anxious, and I didn't understand why until I entered into my assigned voting booth to start voting. As I paused before I started to vote, it all made sense to me. My anxiety existed because this time, 35 years later, I understood the importance of my vote. Better yet, I understood the sacredness of it. The blood that was shed and the sacrifices that were made helped create the sanctity of voting, and the sanctity of voting elevated my act of voting above partisan politics and the implicit and explicit biases. I understood that what I was doing was much bigger than choosing one candidate over another or a party over another. I understood that my act of voting did not even validate my race, political, or spiritual views. I believe that at the time, what my voting validated was my existence within a society where my voice mattered. It validated my personhood. And when we look through the lens of people, we also get to see people like Barbara, a woman in Southeast Florida who for over 20 years thought she would never be able to vote because of previous felony convictions due to a drug addiction. At some point, she had even given up hope. But as one of our organizers sat with her in her home, there she was filling out a voter registration form with tears flowing down her cheeks as she became overwhelmed with the significance of the moment. After signing her name on the form, she looked up and asked our organizers to pray that she will be able to live long enough to be able to vote in the upcoming presidential elections. You see, what we were initially unaware of was that at some point prior to our encounter with Barbara, her doctor had given her 6 months to live because of an illness. Just think about that. Here we have a woman who has less than 6 months to live, and her dying wish was not to visit Disney World or to meet a celebrity or to visit an exotic location. Her wish was to get to feel what it felt like to be a full citizen, to feel what it felt like to engage in something bigger than her, and maybe like me, get to experience that validation of her existence in spite of the labels that society placed on her. She wanted to be a part of We the People. As I shared her story, I was approached by a reporter that asked if he can get an interview with Barbara. When I reached out to see if she was willing to be interviewed, I was told that Barbara died a couple of days before my call. I was devastated. I was devastated that Barbara didn't get the chance she yearned for so many years. As I mourned her passing, a local supervisor of elections heard me lamenting about the failed opportunity of Barbara voting, and he offered presenting a posthumous vote to Barbara's family. And in preparing Barbara's family for the presentation, that's when I discovered that after Barbara was cremated, her sister, knowing how much Barbara wanted to vote, took Barbara's ashes with her when she went to vote. And as fate would have it, it was in the same room that we were presenting the family with the posthumous vote certificate. So when I hear that word vote, my first thoughts are not on the things that separate us as a people or the issues that have been tearing our great nation apart. Instead, my first thoughts are the people from all walks of life who've made great sacrifices for the right to vote. I choose to think about our shared humanity and how our collective participation can create a more vibrant democracy. When I hear the word vote, I choose to hear We the People, and you should too.